greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated, said Mahatma Gandhi. India has a rich heritage of not only historical monuments but also fosters a diverse range of natural landscapes, being an abode for the most exquisite and majestic animals. However, due to rampant hunting, colonization and habitat destruction, these species face a grave existential threat. Recognizing the same, the Indian Parliament passed a series of landmark legislations, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960 and the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, amongst many others.
Our country will be celebrating 75 years of independence in 2022. It would be a moment of great pride, glory and joy. Fresh series of Sansad TV, 75 years laws that shaped India, is a unique program, deliberating, discussing and commending different laws that have been introduced and adopted during these golden years. I'm your host Hemant Batra, back with another episode in that fresh series. Today our focus will be on the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960, in short the PCA Act, and other related landmark laws on wildlife protection. In the next half an hour, we will discuss background and importance of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960 and the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, its legislative journey and some key provisions, the correlation between the Indian Constitution and the said acts, the impact brought about by the said laws, and some of the landmark judgments passed in relation to the said acts.
The Constitution of India provides for the protection of the animals through the directive principles of state policy and the fundamental duties. Article 48 envisages breeding and caring for farm animals on modern and scientific lines, thereby preserving and improving the breeds and prohibiting the slaughter of cows and calves and other milch and draft cattle. Article 48A envisages the safeguarding of forests and wildlife. Article 51A Clause G makes every citizen of India duty-bound to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures.
The PCA Act 1960 was enacted to prevent the infliction of unnecessary pain or suffering of captured or domestic animals and to ensure their well-being. Section 4 of this Act establishes the Animal Welfare Board of India in relation to animal rights. Further, the PCA Act lays down a comprehensive regulatory and penalizing framework dealing with the cruelty to animals, their experimentation, training and exhibitions. And then there is the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, enacted to protect the wildlife by controlling poaching, smuggling and illegal trade in respect thereof, by making it illegal to hunt any listed wild animals and punishing offenders with imprisonment. To talk about these milestone legislations, we have with us two distinguished guests in our studio. We have with us Siddharth Luthra, one of the leading lawyers in the country, a leading arguing counsel. He's a senior advocate and former additional solicitor general, and a very passionate activist lawyer when it comes to animal rights. He has represented so many welfare organizations, animal welfare organizations, before courts as well as public forums. Welcome, Siddharth.
Thank you.
And we also have with us a very well-known animal rights activist, Gauri Maulekhi. Gauri, welcome to the studios.
Thank you.
Gauri, you have helped so many states with regard to implementation of the PCA Act, and you are also awardee of the Nari Shakti Puruskar. So we are pleased to have you in our studios.
Thank you.
So let's start with our discussion, and let me come to you first, Siddharth. Siddharth, we would like to know from you as to why these two statutes, which we just referred to, with regard to which this discussion is happening, are considered as the landmark laws in terms of the history of legislations in India.
The reason for this law was because as we developed as a republic,
Right.
as we became sensitive about our fundamental rights,
Right.
it was imperative that we become sensitive to the rights of those around us, those creatures who don't have a voice of their own. And therefore, you have the 1960 Act, which was the landmark legislation of its time, far, far ahead of other nations similarly placed.
Right.
Yet we had a problem with wildlife because wildlife remained in a grey area. You had state legislations, and therefore there was felt a need because this was in the second list, that's the state list.
Right.
So the states had to be got together. Now, of course, it's in the concurrent list, but the states had to be got together, and with the states coming on board, a legislation was passed, which was the Wildlife Protection Act, which sought to ban hunting or restrict hunting, and really it's now completely banned. So hunting is not permitted. Your natural, we all go to forests, we go to national parks, we go to the reserves. The only reason you can go to these places and still see a semblance of wildlife, whether it be tigers in the wild, whether it be leopards, elephants, is only because of the concerted moves by Parliament, followed by some, I will say all state government, because some state governments' role in this matter has been less than, I would say, desirable.
I see.
And since there has been, with the increase in population, a constant man-animal conflict, these laws and their constant redevelopment and change was very important to preserve wildlife in its form as it's stated. In fact, initially after 72, trade in wildlife articles used to exist. Some states, including the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, used to allow that. Till that was curtailed, the law became applicable all over India. And also what was most important was that, ivory used to be traded, and under the guise of ivory, elephant tusks were being traded.
Absolutely.
Till the government came down and the courts came down.
Absolutely.
Shahtush you could buy off government stores because nobody realized that it was something which had to be preserved. It was a scheduled product under the Wildlife Act.
Absolutely, yes.
And I think we've come a long way.
Right.
Of course, that struggle will continue.
But there is one more aspect, Siddharth, which sort of bothers me, or perhaps even the viewers would like to have your view on that, the Indian Constitution also has quite a few provisions dealing with welfare and well-being of animals. Obviously you mentioned Article 21, but then there are provisions under the Directive Principles of State Policy chapter, as well as the fundamental duties under which the citizens are supposed to sort of take care of animals. Now, as a council, when you are seeking enforcement of animal rights, how do you reconcile with the constitutional provisions as well as the provisions of these statutes?
So I'll tell you what happened. Directive principles, as you know and most of us know, are directives really, or policies which the government should bring in by virtue of legislation.
Right.
And the PC Act is one such policy initiative which has now become law in consonance with the constitutional principle.
Right.
But we have gone using these legislations and using interpretive processes through the courts. We've gone ahead and said, read 48, read 51, along with Article 21, and we have now elevated it to a fundamental right.
Fantastic.
So there has been a legislative journey through these legislations, and there is a judicial journey, and it's got elevated at a very high level.
Fantastic.
Today, in fact, there's a very interesting debate, which is the matters pending in Supreme Court about cultural rights and fundamental rights, Article 21. So people say, for example, as I said, racing of animals, it's a cultural right. Or then there's an issue also about animal sacrifice, which is exempted under the PC Act.
Right.
Now, that also is being sought to say, is it essential part of religion, the sacrifice, or not? Otherwise, you just can't sacrifice animals for the sake that you want to do it.
Gauri, would you like to supplement to what Siddharth has said with regard to the significance of these laws as well as the constitutional provisions?
While we have the most comprehensive constitution in the world, and it has made its provision for protecting all kinds of sections of society, and non-human animals are one of them, which rightly seek protection under directive principles of state policy as well as fundamental duties. But I believe the statutes now, they were formed, legislated in 1960 and 72, have sort of become a little out of date and would require a little bit of a rehauling, for which it's really time.
I see.
If we read it in today's context, the penalties are very outdated. 50 rupees is the penalty prescribed under the law. The Government of India at this time is reviewing the law, and is 150 members of Parliament have kind of supported this gesture.
Really? Right.
And we are hoping that very soon the amendment will come. But at the present time, the Act has become very hard to enforce. We still, I would say, have one of the best laid down provisions in the world in terms of law.
So, that's why, these two laws have been branded as milestone laws or landmark laws. But let us now see some key extracts from the parliamentary debates when the said bills in relation to the said acts were being deliberated upon.
I beg to move that the infliction of unnecessary pain or suffering on animals, and for that purpose to amend the law relating to the prevention of cruelty to animals as passed by Rajya Sabha, to be taken into consideration. At the outset, I may say I do not claim that this is an ideal bill. After 70 years, we are making an attempt to put on the statute at least something that will ultimately lead us to the ideal bill. After some years of experience,
The word unnecessary cruelty have not been defined anywhere in this Act. 45 members have worked upon this bill. In this whole Act, I do not find this little phrase defined. It is left to reason, to common sense. To you, it may be unnecessary cruelty. To me, it may not be. To make it rather understandable, let me ask, have you ever observed the killing of pigs?
I am so glad that finally this bill could reach us. Most of the European countries have such good legislations on the subject, and for us to lag behind at this stage is rather undesirable. It is good that we have taken a step to be on par with other modern nations who have decided, with notwithstanding there being cruelty or killing of animals, such killing should be as painless as possible.
apart from its aesthetic value, the economic and scientific aspects of wildlife cannot be lost sight of. In India, however, a large number of species of animals have reached a stage of extinction, and their exploitation cannot be considered for the present. The bill greatly strengthened the scope and powers of the state governments in regard to wildlife preservation.
Siddharth, coming to you once again, these laws have been in place from 5 to 7 decades, and they have served us well, as I gathered from the discussion. Now, society evolves, and as the society evolves, the needs of the society change, depending on the situations and circumstances. In the recent past, we have, for instance, noticed that, people have been uploading videos on social media, digital media, and even OTT platforms where one could gather that the animals were being subjected to torture. So do you think, Siddharth, that the current setup of legislation is good enough, adequate enough to deal with those situations or challenges, or do we need some improvement there?
So, insofar as OTTs is concerned, the Government of India has come out with new guidelines in April 2021,
yes,
where OTTs can now be asked to take down such objectionable material.
Right.
But I believe this is an area which we really need to look into,
Right.
because your parent legislation should be dealing with this,
Absolutely.
whether it be the PCA Act or the Wildlife Protection Act, and that's something fundamental. And as Gauri said just a moment ago, we need to relook at these laws because they are not in tune with contemporary reality, where we've shifted into a totally different arena.
Right.
And therefore, we need to meet the turn of changing technology, and
Right.
our laws must be in sync. More work needs to be done in the parent legislations.
Absolutely.
And the overhaul should bring that to the fore.
Right. Yeah. So that's a good point you have made, that the parent legislation could actually go through some revision, or some amendments could be brought about instead of bringing in absolutely a new legislation. Gauri, connecting to what Siddharth said, the role of enforcement agencies, let's say state police, etc., becomes very important in these situations. And general perception is that the police or enforcement agencies are not geared up enough with regard to knowledge and expertise for dealing with animal crimes. What is your take on that?
Correct. So there is a lot of lack of seriousness with the law enforcement agencies, especially in out of the metro cities, out of the A-grade cities where such matters keep coming to the police stations, so people are a little more aware. But if you go to B-grade, C-grade towns or rural areas, you would find that people have never even heard of this law. Probably because in mainstream police academies and even the judicial academies, the subject is never taken up, and it's only in the past 4 or 5 years we started seeing a lot of workshops on this subject being held in police and judicial academies.
In the form of training and orientation.
Yes.
And so on and so
forth. Trainings of existing officers or induction trainings of new recruits who are trained in what is to be done when a matter of animal cruelty comes to the fore.
Right.
Also, there was a little bit of a lacuna in legislation as to what to do with victim animals that have been rescued from a situation of abuse. Earlier, they were treated as property, but now they are treated as victims, where in law you would understand very different concepts.
Yes.
So it's only now that with the Supreme Court's direction, it has now been legislated on by the government in 2017.
I think we'll have to take a little break now, and we'll continue the discussion henceforth. We'll have to now slip into a very short break. After the break, we will take our discussion forward on legal developments in the realm of animal protection. Don't go anywhere, as we'll be back soon. Welcome back after the break. You're watching our special show on 75 years of legislative journey. Today we are discussing 2 acts that strengthen the rights of animals. Acts that highlight the constitutional obligation of the citizens towards ensuring animal well-being. We are talking about the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960 and the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Gauri, we left at the enforcement agency's role and the role of the police. I think we do need to compliment them as well. If you look at controlling animal sacrifice, since India's independence, that has been a great achievement. And there are few state laws as well, plus the parliamentary laws, what we are discussing. Now, what do you say, whether the enforcement agencies have had a major role in controlling animal sacrifice backed by these laws, or the judiciary, or the general sort of awareness amongst the people?
I'd say if I have to list them in sequentially, I'd say it's awareness among people that more and more we are moving away from animal sacrifice.
Right.
Probably some communities more than others, but also the courts have played a very important role.
Absolutely.
As in loco parentis. They have legislated in Uttarakhand, in Odisha, Tripura, Himachal Pradesh, now Kerala even. Yes. But I'd say that the courts have given very progressive judgments, and we also have to see the provision enshrined in our constitution. Article 51 AG does not just talk about compassion to animals, but also talks about developing a scientific temper.
Right.
And in the line of scientific temper, animal sacrifice just does not fit into the scheme of things.
Siddharth, are there any court judgments, dealing with this controlling of animal sacrifice, or anywhere where you have also appeared?
I must tell you that since the 1950s, 1958 was the first important judgment, and thereafter there have been a number of decisions.
I see.
There is a balancing the courts have had to do. On the one hand there are 3 parts to it, I would put it. One is the animal sacrifice. One is the commercial slaughter of animals which is used for food or otherwise.
Right.
And the third is balancing economics, because eventually there is also a line of thought that old disabled animals, and that's a line of thought, whether it's valid or not, I don't want to get into, but that's a line of thought that they need to be culled because they are a pressure on the economic resources. The courts will only step in and do step in repeatedly, as they have. And one of the most classic cases which I have been appearing in is the 2011 and 2014 Animal Welfare Board of India judgment versus Nagaraj, which has elevated these rights and talked about the need and the purpose of the PCA. And it's a well-written decision. It's settled the law for the subject. It's, as I said, it's elevated it to a constitutional fundamental right.
Right.
So these churnings will take place.
Right.
But eventually, it is also for the legislatures to legislate and ensure that not only do the laws exist after overhauling, but that the regulatory framework is so specific that there are few gaps within.
Gaps, yeah.
And our problem is the gaps within.
Absolutely. Those grey areas crop
which the courts can only interpret to a point.
Absolutely.
They can't legislate, they can definitely interpret.
Absolutely. The Indian animal industry is expected to grow to rupees 933.3 billion by 2026. As such, new issues and areas have emerged in the field of animal law. The pet industry is one of the major industries that has seen a huge amount of growth and demand. Currently, the pet industry values around rupees 230 crores. Likewise, cattle preservation and protection has also become a major policy and priority for lawmakers. Apart from the laws we are discussing, more than 20 states in India have additionally adopted their own specific laws for cattle preservation and protection. These statistics are quite enlightening, if not alarming. Let me take cattle preservation and protection first, and then I'll come to pet industry issues as well. Siddharth, you were talking about a judgment dealing with cattle protection and preservation. Would you recommend a uniform law dealing with cattle protection and preservation?
So in 2018, the central government has come out with the idea of having a uniform law for all the states and
with regard to cattle.
With regard to cattle. And I hope that this matter, which is pending currently, I believe, with the Ministry of Environment, will be considered. There are the 2017 rules which Gauri alluded to a while back regarding livestock and regulation of livestock markets. So all these legislations now, the legislation needs to be comprehensive, but we'll also have to fine-tune it for local realities. So the reality, you know, in let us say a place like Uttar Pradesh may not be the reality in Tamil Nadu or in Mizoram or Nagaland.
I get it.
So these or the reality is way up in Ladakh. So we have to make sure that the law that is made is broad-based but fine-tuned.
Absolutely.
And that is what will make the law workable. But definitely the need for a one uniform law. And I hope that when we overhaul the PCA and the Wildlife Act, we have a body of animal and welfare laws almost like a code. You have, I mean, you look at it, you have the Indian Banking Code, Bankruptcy Code.
Yes.
Now, the Bankruptcy Code is a comprehensive bunch of legislation which covers almost every aspect of bankruptcy. We need a similar law because, face it, what world are we going to leave behind for our children?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. Very well said. So, Siddharth, you know, what are those landmark judgments which you would like to share with our viewers?
So, I will begin by, as I said, the 1958 Muhammad Hanif Qureshi judgment, which was on cow slaughter. And after that, there are judgments in 1962. Then there is a judgment in 1986, which is the Ashutosh, 1995, which is the Ashutosh Diary decision. There's Maheshwar Singh, which is a pending matter. And there are matters arising from different states which are even currently pending in the Supreme Court.
Well, it's time to take the viewer's question. This time the question has come from Pragalab from Bangalore.
In the last few decades, what changes have you seen in the attitude of people or awareness amongst them towards protection of animals?
Gauri, would you like to take this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, while attitudes among people is changing in general, people are more, conscious about their treatment of animals in their surroundings. We've also at the same time seen a huge rise in cruelty when it comes to industrial animal agriculture. There are a huge number of economic interests of big corporates and companies using very large numbers of animals for meat, milk and eggs, which is again one more thing that is sort of unregulated. There's also an experimental, thing that is coming into now people like us who are, more aware, especially in metros. Some consciousness of cultured meat. Getting meat from which is actual meat, not from an animal. So that is the new sensitivity.
I'm also from Metro, but I'm quite ignorant about this. Can you just draw a distinction?
So now people who do not want to, yes. So people who do not want to consume, meat that is obtained from a slaughtered animal can now exercise the option in some countries, not in India as yet, to actually grow that meat, or it can be cultured in a biofarm where a tissue of an animal can be multiplied without having to slaughter an animal. So I think those kind of perceptions that are coming in to India as well. Now, Government of India has invested a lot into this research, and we are hoping that a regulatory pathway will soon be made, and this would become a reality.
This was real knowledge, even for me, in that sense. Well, on that note, we come to the conclusion of this episode. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your expert views, and they were truly, truly informative. Well, at the core of these laws lies the concrete measures for protecting, fostering, and sensitizing the citizens about the well-being of our animals, our rich wildlife. That's all we have in this edition of the program. You can send your feedback at sansadtv@sansad.nic.in. You can also connect with us on various other social media platforms.
Next week, we'll discuss the Representation of People Act 1950. Send your questions at sansadtv@sansad.nic.in.
Thank you for watching. Goodbye, good luck, and stay safe.